The Catholic Church allowed classical Chinese to be used in churches hundreds of years before English. You may know that for a large part of the history of the Roman Catholic Church, the official language was Latin. And so all across Western Europe, you could go to any Catholic church and hear the same Latin Mass. And around the time of the Protestant Reformation, this was actually codified at the Council of Trent. So basically the church said if it's not a Latin Mass, it's not Catholic. And this wasn't overturned until all the way up into the 1960s. But the exception that was made for classical Chinese is actually super interesting. In 1582, a Jesuit missionary named Matteo Ricci arrived in China with a new strategy. In order to convey Catholic teaching to this very different culture, he decided to absorb and adopt as much of Chinese culture as he could. And he determined that the best way to create Chinese Catholics was to link Catholicism to a language that kind of functioned like Latin for them, classical Chinese. And since he was a missionary exploring uncharted territory, the Pope was actually kind of cool with this. And so a very unique exception was made, similar to the ones made for the Glagolitic Mass in Croatia and indigenous languages in North America. The entire Catholic Mass and Gospels were translated into classical Chinese. And I compared it to Latin before because it wasn't really the language that the common people spoke. It was a literary language of the scholarly elite that had the same kind of reverence and authority as Latin in Western Europe. And making this exception was actually largely successful, with over 250,000 Chinese Catholics by the 1660s, all of whom learned and practiced the faith in classical Chinese at a time when English couldn't even be used for the Gospels yet. So why didn't Catholicism continue to grow in China? Well, not everybody agreed with Ricci and the Jesuits' philosophy of adapting to local cultures. Dominicans, for instance, had issues with Jesuits allowing what was perceived as ancestor worship. And they also thought that some of the classical Chinese translations of Latin words were allowing for misinterpretations and heresies. For instance, they didn't like the idea of using Shangdi for God because it seemed a little bit too abstract. So there was a huge debate about it in Rome, with even the Chinese emperor getting involved. And ultimately in 1704, Pope Clement XI sided against the Jesuits and banned the classical Chinese Mass, which severely halted the mission effort and led to a lot of missionaries actually leaving China. But it's really interesting to me to think about how the intellectual history of China would have been different if he sided the other way. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.